story about his first preaching class. It was taught by a professor who thought that any preachers worth their salt could build a sermon from one particular biblical verse. The Gospel of John, chapter 6, verse 10. Well, most of us remember that that was the feeding of the 5,000 in John, but we could not remember what that particular verse said. And so he recited it to us, and we all laughed. It seemed to all of us ridiculous to try and build a sermon from that alone. You all heard it in this morning's reading of the scripture, but I should probably remind you of it. Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. So, as I sat down to prepare the sermon for this morning, I read through today's gospel reading and saw verse 10. I remembered my colleague's story, and I thought about it. There's a great deal of grass in the place. There's a great deal of grass in the place. And I reached a decision. Nope, not even going to try. So instead, let's turn back to the disciples. When Jesus told the disciples to feed the people, the disciples felt absolutely powerless in the face of so many hungry mouths. Still, if the disciples felt no particular personal responsibility for this crowd, well, Jesus raised their consciousness on that issue. He showed them a God of abundance, a God whose power and presence became tangible in the simple act of sharing. Even if the gift seemed wholly inadequate, it became a source of the full measured flood of God's grace. But then Jesus withdrew from the misplaced enthusiasm of the crowd, which was ready to acclaim him their king. Take him by force if necessary. Now, this happened a number of times throughout the Gospels. The people are about to declare Jesus king, or maybe even Messiah, and Jesus makes himself scarce. See, the people begin to misunderstand the point of Jesus' message, that the realm of God, which Jesus has been proclaiming, is not off in the future somewhere or somewhen, but is present among them right now. And this realm of God is not only present now, but they are invited to participate in it. But they wanted a king or a Messiah to embody the realm of God for them, releasing them from the opportunity and the responsibility to participate. When Jesus withdrew like this, he was redirecting the people's attention away from himself and back onto themselves as the mediator Jesus withdrew and sent his disciples on ahead in the boat. And they found themselves in heavy weather. "Do not be afraid," said Jesus to the frightened disciples as he came out to meet them where they were, in over their heads, so to speak. As soon as he joined them in the boat, they found themselves safely at their destination. So, two stories, beginning of the 6th chapter of John. Both of these stories spoke directly to Christians living in desperate times. When the Gospel of John began circulating among the churches sometime in the last decade of the 1st century, the church was already caught in a storm, the storm of history. Rome had already crushed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, and was persecuting both Jews and Christians. For the church, it was a time of chaos and brutality. And in the midst of this, John, the gospel writer, proclaims that when the storm hits, when fear and terror threaten to undo us, there is one who comes alongside us. The one who does not prevent the storm, but who bears us through it. When the going gets rough, when God seems far off, do not be afraid, for the love of Christ goes with us, bears us up, sustains us through the worst of circumstances. The disciples were afraid in the boat. And they were afraid earlier when they faced the hungry multitude. Fear is the driving force behind scarcity thinking. Fear carefully measures the scarcity and says it's never enough. Certainly not enough for everyone. Fear pushes us into isolation, to look out for number one. Fear makes us feel like we're sinking in need, sinking in despair, sinking in depression and loss. Fear makes us grab onto anything to save us, to pull us out from the stormy sea. Fear makes us arm ourselves to the teeth and then miss the hand held out to us in assurance, telling us not to fear, but to recognize that God is God, and we are only human, that we are loved by God, and we are held in the everlasting arms of pure grace. The answer to fear is God's abundant presence. A presence that we are invited, indeed called, to share among ourselves in the church and to carry with us out into the world. You know what? That does make me think of that abundant grass at the place where Jesus made his disciples feed the 5,000. In this place, the Holy Land that we call today, the Palestinian region of the world, grass was a scarce thing. So like this church, when we declare, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. No matter who you are, no matter your life circumstances, when you come through the door into this sanctuary, you have a place here. And of course, just as Jesus wanted the people to participate in the realm of God, Jesus wants us here to make that unconditional welcome that we proclaim a reality. Jesus invites us to be the mediators of the grace of God that He gave to us. At the conclusion of today's worship service, we will sing together one of the great hymns of the African American tradition. Precious Lord, take my hand. It was written by Thomas Dorsey, an accomplished musician and performer of jazz and blues. His beloved wife, Nettie, died suddenly in childbirth. And 2 days later, their newborn son also died. Dorsey said that he did not know how he could go on living himself. And his only consolation came at his piano. At his piano, he figured out how he's going to go on living. And he expressed it in this extraordinary hymn, a hymn that he shared with the world. A hymn that has been a support and comfort to untold millions of people. Like a handful of bread and fish in the wilderness, with a patch of grass to sit on, touching hearts and lives in ways that surpass our imagining. Dorsey's hymn rises out of the storms of life, the very real and deep storms that assault us, and lifts up faith and trust in God's abundant presence. Precious Lord, take my hand. Lead me on, let me stay.